What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 9 waiver wire pickups, the names you need to know, so make sure to stay tuned in. And if you enjoy the content, hit that like button, subscribe, and definitely check us out online at adpfantasy.com. We've got your fantasy info. We've got your NFL game breakdowns. Join the free newsletter for exclusive content along with becoming a member to get personalized fantasy advice. All the details in the description, so make sure to check that out. But for now, let's get right into it. Kicking things off at the quarterback position, there's actually a lot of repeat names from last week, but with so many great matchups in Week 9, there's no way we can't repeat some of these guys. And we start once more with Kirk Cousins, who kind of, as we predicted last week versus the Washington Redskins, only had 285 yards passing, no touchdowns, no interceptions. It was the Dalvin Cook show. Kind of made sense. Game script dictated that. But in Week 9, a contest versus the Kansas City Chiefs, it's going to be a much different type of offensive performance, more than likely, from the Minnesota Vikings, potentially getting Adam Thielen back. And for them to have a chance in this contest, they're going to need to air out the football to keep pace with probably a returning Patrick Mahomes. If he sits out, that might play into this. So I would go ahead and monitor that. But I would say with Kirk Cousins rivaling this Kansas City offense, he's going to need to be stellar through the air. I envision potentially a 20-point performance from him this week in fantasy. Next up, we've got Sam Darnold, who admittedly so these last 2 weeks has been a name to forget. Week 8 versus the Jaguars, 218 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, but also 3 interceptions. On top of that, Darnold dealing with a left thumb sprain, but the expectation is he will play through that. The reason we bring up his name again, we laid out the groundwork for this last week, but we'll mention it again. In Week 9, we have a start for the New York Jets offensively in terms of defensive matchups that is absolutely amazing. Week 9, Miami Dolphins. Week 10, New York Giants. Week 11, the Washington Redskins. Then the Oakland Raiders, Cincinnati Bengals, and Miami Dolphins again. That takes us all the way through Week 14. This is going to be a bounce back performance if I've ever seen one, not only from Sam Darnold, but potentially for this entire Jets offense. I have no doubts in my mind that this is going to be one of the best fantasy runs for an offense for a span of what looks like to be 6 weeks. And this is going to be probably the last time that you can go ahead and add Sam Darnold if you haven't taken a chance on him already. His stock right now, not incredibly high. Like we said, the last 2 weeks haven't been all that good, dealing with a thumb sprain. So go ahead, take a flyer on him, and at least for this week versus the Miami Dolphins, Sam Darnold's better than a backup quarterback a la Mason Rudolph. We've seen him have success versus opposing defenses with better talent. I think he can be a borderline top 12 quarterback for Week 9. Our final quarterback on this list is Jameis Winston, who this last week versus the Tennessee Titans, tougher defense, 301 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, also a couple of fumbles. And look, we know what we're going to get with Jameis Winston for the most part. We're going to get some issues with turnovers, but we also have the big play potential. And that's exactly what was on display this last week with guys like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, potentially a returning O.J. Howard. Point being is there are a lot of options in this Tampa Bay offense. We know Winston, along with Bruce Arians, will air it out, and there will be scoring opportunities for the Bucs. Now, Week 9, we should see a similar type of performance as the Bucs have the Seattle Seahawks. I would say the Seahawks a little bit of an easier defensive matchup than that of the Tennessee Titans. I envision Jameis Winston airing it out again in a contest where the Bucs will probably find themselves more likely than not down early. So they're going to have to go ahead and pass the football. That's the strength of this team. I envision a similar type of stat line for Winston, actually, about 20 points fantasy-wise. So I'd go ahead and fire him up in Week 9. Next up, we get to our running backs, and we start with the name to know for these Week 9 waivers. That is Jaylen Samuels. because in Week 8 versus the Dolphins, James Conner goes out late with what could potentially be a clavicle injury. And if it looks as bad as initial reports are made out to be, well, Conner could miss significant time. Now, obviously, this is something you have to track as the week goes, but also doesn't help that Benny Snell injured. Jaylen Samuels is pretty much the only running back left. He's obviously coming from a procedure, didn't play on Monday night, but the expectation is he will be available moving forward, which means that he has to be prioritized out of every single other running back, pretty much every single other player, because this late in the season, you get a chance at a borderline low-end RB1, the way he's being used in this Steelers offense. You go ahead and take the opportunity and run with it. And we've said it before, with Mason Rudolph under center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, this offense goes through its running backs, whether it's just hand the ball off to them, whether it's trick plays with them, or just screen passes galore. Jaylen Samuels has a bunch of value in PPR formats as well. I'd go ahead and prioritize Jaylen Samuels above everyone else this week. He's got a decent matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts, and he's going to be the focal point of this Pittsburgh offense if James Conner isn't available for potentially the rest of the season. Next up, we've got Raheem Mostert of the 49ers. And again, he shows up here due to mostly injuries in that 49ers backfield. Matt Breida and then Wilson going down later in that game versus the Carolina Panthers. So Mostert got some opportunities there in cleanup duty, considering that the 49ers were absolutely blowing out the Panthers. So do keep that in mind when you look at a stat line of 60 yards and a touchdown. But the point being, the 49ers are a run-first football team with a great defense, and they're going to go ahead and give an opportunity to whoever the running back is. Now, Mostert does go up the pecking order with Breida and the Wilson injury. Now, we have to obviously see how long those will last. They look to be shorter term. But again, let's not forget this is Tevin Coleman's backfield. However, versus that Arizona defense, there will be opportunities for both of these guys. So Mostert is worth a speculative add. Our third and final running back is Kenyan Drake, formerly of the Miami Dolphins. And congrats to you if you went ahead and stashed him in hopes that he would get traded. That's exactly what's happened, is he is now a member of the Arizona Cardinals. Unfortunately, long term, this isn't really the best fantasy result, as we do expect David Johnson and Chase Edmonds to return. However, short term, at least for this week, maybe even next, well, Kenyan Drake should see opportunities. Now, obviously, this is because the Cardinals are going to be playing on Thursday night, so short week, and that means David Johnson, Chase Edmonds probably will not play again. Unfortunately, well, the Cardinals have the San Francisco 49ers, who have one of the best defenses in the NFL. So the ceiling for Drake is definitely a lot lower than we would like to see this week. But the following week, a favorable matchup. We'll see how long he remains the primary guy for the Cardinals. But at least for a week or two, you can go ahead and get some type of production from Kenyan Drake. A little bit more opportune in PPR formats for those dinks and dumps, especially versus the 49ers, I would say. But again, don't look at him as a long-term solution. Getting to our wide receivers, we start with Danny Amendola, who again continues to thrive in this Detroit Lions offense that has become more and more pass-heavy, especially with the injury to Kerryon Johnson a week ago. This last performance in Week 8, 8 receptions for 95 yards. And Week 9 should have a lot more similar type of opportunity, as the Detroit Lions will be facing the Oakland Raiders, who have been getting beat defensively these last 2 weeks. And Matthew Stafford has looked absolutely sensational, throwing it a bunch. So whether it's Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, or Danny Amendola, all those 3 guys right now are fantasy viable. Obviously, Golladay being the primary one, then Marvin Jones a little bit more touchdown dependent. But Amendola in PPR formats is someone that I'd go ahead and take a look at. Next up, we've got Chris Conley of the Jaguars, who this last week had 4 receptions for 103 yards and a touchdown. Now, as you can see from the targets and from the receptions, it wasn't a lot of volume, but Conley still capitalized. Long touchdown in there. The reason why he's being included here, twofold. First and foremost, D.D. Westbrook goes down in that game in Week 8 versus the Jets. So that means more opportunities automatically for Chris Conley. Personally, I think the big beneficiary here will continue to be DJ Chark. But wide receiver 2, Chris Conley, seems to be that next man up in a contest in Week 9 versus this Houston Texans defense that now just lost J.J. Watt, that's been being beat in the secondary. All of a sudden looks like a favorable matchup for Gardner Minshew, who should have opportunities to air it out a bunch. And look for DJ Chark and potentially Chris Conley to have some success in Week 9. Our third and final wide receiver is Anthony Miller of the Bears. And look, even though I've been on record saying that I don't like this Bears offense, I especially don't like Mitchell Trubisky, there's something to be said about favorable matchups, and that's exactly what the Bears have, as in Week 9 they will be facing the Philadelphia secondary. More importantly, that Philadelphia front should more than likely shut down the Bears' rushing attack, which will go ahead and force Mitchell Trubisky, for better or for worse, to throw the football. Allen Robinson should get the majority of the coverage defensively by the Eagles, which means Anthony Miller is that big-bodied wide receiver in red zone situations especially, should have some high upside. So I'd go ahead, take a shot on Anthony Miller. I anticipate we'll see a similar type of performance, about 3 to 4, maybe 5 catches and between 60 and 80 yards. Bonus if he gets a touchdown. That's what you're ultimately hoping for here in a matchup versus this Philadelphia secondary that's been getting beat all season long. Going to our tight ends, we start with Jonnu Smith of the Tennessee Titans, who this last week versus the Bucs, 6 receptions for 78 yards and a touchdown. And basically, you can go ahead and fire up Smith while Delanie Walker is dealing with his lingering injury. Now, a lot of people probably were a little bit hesitant last week to trust him, but there's going to be a lot of priority on Jonnu Smith as far as tight end additions this week. We're dealing with bye weeks. We're dealing with a wasteland at the tight end position. Anytime that you have a big target like that in Smith, compared to other guys in that pass-catching group like Corey Davis and A.J. Brown that are more big play threats that don't get as many looks, Smith will go ahead and get you those yardage, get you those receptions, which can be valuable even when he doesn't get a touchdown. And similar to the entire pass-catching group in this offense, they all get a little bit of a bump when Ryan Tannehill is under center compared to Marcus Mariota. The matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, it's going to be a mediocre one for the Tennessee Titans, but I would still go ahead and look for Smith to have some success, as George Kittle was able to go ahead and have a big day versus the Panthers in Week 8. Next, we have got Ryan Griffin of the Jets, who in Week 8, huge stat line, 4 receptions, 65 yards, and 2 touchdowns. As far as pure scoring at the tight end position, Griffin was in good company, and there might be a lot of waiver wire additions to go ahead and target him, especially considering the Miami Dolphins matchup. And I agree that pretty much you're going to want to go ahead and target as many New York Jets in that matchup on paper at least. But this addition of Ryan Griffin on this list is, let's be honest, fully dependent on the status of one Chris Herndon. Because once Herndon returns, finally, he's going to be automatically the number 1 tight end on this team, and Griffin might become all but an afterthought. But again, as long as Herndon fails to suit up, Griffin, we've seen the tight end position be viable for Darnold in the New York Jets. I'd go ahead and take a flyer on him versus a great matchup in Week 9 versus the Dolphins. Our third and final tight end is Darren Fells of the Texans, who in Week 8, similar stat line to Ryan Griffin. He went for 6 receptions for 58 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, a lot of people might go ahead and check to see if Fells is available, and I get it. After that type of big performance, you're going to go ahead and take notice. But I just do want to go ahead and caution you guys a little bit. Even though Fells had a great performance and he's going to be facing the Jaguars, who just gave up a lot of points to Ryan Griffin, the aforementioned, in Week 8, Fells' floor is extremely low, as in like 0 to 1 to 2 points. That's the problem, because you've still got DeAndre Hopkins, you've still got Kenny Stills, you've got the rushing ability of Deshaun Watson, and then Carlos Hyde, Duke Johnson. So I'd go ahead and consider Fells only in the best matchups. He's a guy that's going to be extremely touchdown dependent, as will a lot of these, tier 2, 3 tight end guys who have been the majority of the ones that are available at this point in time off of waivers. Finally, getting to our defenses, we start with the Buffalo Bills. And maybe you didn't want to go ahead and trust the Bills last week versus the Philadelphia Eagle and Carson Wentz. That's fine. But guess what? If they're available, absolutely scoop them up in a heartbeat, because they have the Washington Redskins in Week 9. And more importantly, Case Keenum might not be able to suit up for this game, which means that entire offense takes a hit for the Washington Redskins. I love the Buffalo Bills defense, regardless if Keenum suits up or not. But if Keenum does sit, I think the Bills defense can be a top 5 defense in Week 9. Next, we have got the Cleveland Browns, who, compared to the Buffalo Bills, will more than likely 100% be available off of waivers. The reason you want to target them here, they have a pretty decent matchup versus the Denver Broncos, who are very up and down offensively, but even more so without Emmanuel Sanders. And now with Joe Flacco being ruled out, that means it's down to second string quarterback play for the Broncos, who were already struggling offensively. We saw the issues that they had last week versus the Colts. So the Browns defense, which might be the lone bright spot on that team, especially up front, I think they're going to go ahead and have a lot of success versus a depleted offense of the Denver Broncos. Our third and final defense is the Philadelphia Eagles, who will be facing the Chicago Bears come Week 9. And we said it last week, anytime you play the Chicago Bears, it's going to be a decent defensive matchup for you because of the shortcomings of one Mitchell Trubisky. But I think even more so this week, because that Philadelphia front 7 is going to do a pretty decent job of stopping the run, which means that Trubisky, whether he likes it or not, will have to put the game on his shoulders, on his back, and see if he can throw the Bears into a victory. And even though the Philadelphia secondary is one that is beatable, which is why we like a guy like Anthony Miller, I think when it's all said and done, the Philadelphia Eagles will still bottle up the Bears enough to about 13, 14, 17 points and force several turnovers, get to the quarterback like we saw the Chargers do last week, and ultimately get you close to 10 fantasy points for Week 9. So with that, we wrap up our look into our weekly waiver wire pickups. As always, let me hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree with this list? Are there certain guys that we didn't mention that you're going to be targeting? Put those in the comments along with any other fantasy questions, who to sit, who to start, maybe who to trade for. We'll do our best to answer those. And if you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, definitely check out the website at adpfantasy.com. It's got all of these videos. Join the community, join the free newsletter, potentially become a member so you can get personalized fantasy advice moving forward into the season. Help you guys dominate your leagues. But in the meantime, I'll see you guys in future videos.